From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Kaylee Lines, I'm Joe Matthew.
It's State of the Union night. President Biden set to deliver the annual address just hours from now. One of his biggest opportunities to pitch for re-election in November and draw a contrast between himself and former President Trump.
President planning to propose higher taxes on the wealthy and corporations and announce action to ramp up delivery of aid to Gaza.
This hour, we'll preview the speech with Republican Senator Shelley Moore Capito of West Virginia and Jay Timmons, CEO of the National Association of Manufacturers. And, of course, the administration's attempts to revive the American manufacturing industry, make investments into the economy through things like the Inflation Reduction Act, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, as well as a slew of other economic policies I'm sure are going to work their way into the speech tonight. But he has a lot of issues he's going to try to run through in an hour to an hour and a half of time.
Yeah, we'll see how that goes on the clock. Some have suggested that he might want to actually speak for longer, to reach for more in an effort to appear vigorous and young and energetic. So much of this, Kaylee, will have to do with tone and presentation as it does with policy. We spoke earlier today on Bloomberg with Democratic Representative Abigail Spanberger of Virginia about the speech tonight. Here she is.
The way that the president speaks to all voters, all Americans, is by talking about what our vision, our shared goals are. I want to hear the president talk about the issues that are front of mind for so many Americans. And certainly, that begins with our fundamental freedoms, specifically abortion rights and reproductive rights. After what we saw the Supreme Court in Alabama do, that's front of mind for so many voters.
Clearly a big list of issues here, Kaylee. Then there's the question of the audience. He's going to have, obviously, a joint session of Congress. The Supreme Court will be sitting right in front of him when he addresses the issue of abortion. The cabinet, of course, will be there. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs, top brass at the military, and so on. The real audience, though, we could argue, is at home as he looks to that camera in the back of the chamber to speak to people in their living rooms.
Absolutely. It is about reaching the American voter just as much as it is about reaching each and every individual member of Congress who will be in that room tonight. And, of course, one of those is joining us now. Republican Senator Shelley Moore Capito of West Virginia is joining us live from Capitol Hill. Senator, thank you so much for being with us on this State of the Union evening. We do want to get to what you expect to hear from the president's speech, but we also do have a question of this hour as to when exactly the Senate may be voting to advance the package, six bill package for spending to keep the government open past midnight tomorrow. Senator, do you know when you will be voting? Will you do so after the speech tonight?
Well, we very possibly could vote after the speech tonight. I mean, we realize that the House sent us overwhelmingly large vote on the six spending packages, which sets our priorities, cuts spending. So we will be considering that either late tonight or tomorrow afternoon. I have a feeling it might be tonight. I'm going to be voting on that. I don't want a government shutdown. And so I think it's time for us to move on our spending bills, and I'm glad that we're going to be doing this.
So it will pass the Senate, Senator, whether it's tonight or tomorrow. I ask you that knowing that the second portion of this could be a lot more difficult than the first.
The second portion could will very well be. It has Homeland Security in there, Department of Defense. My bill is the Health, Education, and Labor bill. I believe the bill tonight with the six bills will pass. Many of them have already passed. Three have passed in the Senate. Several have passed in the House. We are going to have some amendment votes, so they may be changed ever slightly, but I feel very confident that the Senate will pass these bills.
But, of course, we have a pretty big speech to get through first that you will be listening to, Senator. I know you spoke earlier on the Senate floor ahead of the president's speech, talking about a number of issues, including what you described as an assault on American energy. This at a time when, in 2023, the U.S. pumped a record amount of oil. What exactly is wrong with this administration's energy policy?
The administration has closed in our energy resources. Just 3 weeks ago, they decided to shut down new construction on our LNG facilities. To me, that hampers not only our domestic energy production, but it also will certainly hurt in our ability to help our allies in Europe. We know they were relying on Russia for natural gas, so I think that this is exceedingly important that we use all of our resources, not just for ourselves, but also for the international safety aspects of it. I can tell you, I sit on the Environment and Public Works Committee. It is regulation after regulation after regulation of this enforced green agenda, which we see now is beginning to crumble while electric vehicles are not being sold as they were promised. The electric vehicle stations aren't being built. So I really do think we've squandered an opportunity here to use our own energy for our own safety.
We spoke earlier about the export of LNG, this moratorium that you referred to with Amos Hochstein, of course, one of the president's advisors, a senior advisor when it comes to energy. Senator, here's what he told us. We'll have you respond.
Okay.
What is on pause is to say beyond that, beyond 2020, beyond 2030, do we need to look for a minute and say, with such exponential growth that we've seen, do we need to look at the economic impacts on the market impact? And do we have to look at what the environmental and climate impacts are on the communities that live along our Gulf Coast before we say we're going to give more permits?
Senator, is it not worth answering those questions before moving on? Or do you, like some, believe the administration will make that moratorium permanent?
Oh, I believe their goal is to make the moratorium permanent. I think we have to look at not just where we are now, but if we look at the electrification of our country, how are we going to power generate to be able to do that? You have to use your basic fuels. Natural gas is one of those. Nuclear. This administration has made it very, very tough to permit anything, and they keep piling on all kinds of different regulations that really hampers our ability to do the baseload energy that we're going to need, not just now, but in the future. So if you're asking me to look into the future, tell me how you're going to power America and power this green agenda without more energy. It can't be done.
Well, as we talk about regulation, and this does relate to the question of energy composition and climate impact in the U.S., the Securities and Exchange Commission yesterday finalized and approved a climate disclosure rule that may have been watered down from what was initially proposed, but already has drawn a lawsuit from the Attorney General of your state, leading a group of 9 states against that rule. Senator, what do you think about the move the SEC has made?
Well, the problem I see with this is this goes all through the administration, and they want to have climate and carbon, and are you using it in the beginning? Who uses it in the end? I think they make the metrics impossible for people to meet and for people to measure. And so, you know, we all want cleaner air, cleaner water, and we're getting there. We need the technology, innovation, and resources to go in that direction, you know, whether it's a hydrogen economy, whether it's carbon capture. All of these things are in our future. But to make our companies be accountable for every single flow, I think it slows the economy. And then what happens? Things get more expensive. People lose their jobs. I mean, it has a compounding effect. And I am fearful that that's what we can see with all of these regulations that are piling on top.
Senator Capito, we've had a look at the guest list for the president tonight at the State of the Union. When you look up into the gallery and to where the First Lady is sitting, you will see the Prime Minister of Sweden. I know that you might want to turn to the border with an answer to this question, but I wonder if you have a message for the Prime Minister when it comes to the request for funding for Ukraine.
Well, I think obviously Sweden has just been admitted into NATO. That is a huge alliance, our allies, and we need to help Ukraine, our allies NATO, obviously us being the largest contributor here. We need to push Putin back, because if we don't push him back in Ukraine, we don't use the funding for Ukraine, when we walk away from this, we're going to empower Putin. And where's he going to go next? He's going to go to a NATO allied country. We know that. He's not going to stop there. So a weakened Putin is in our self-interest. That's why I believe that funding for Ukraine is exceedingly important. And that's why I think, you know, the ambassador from Sweden would probably agree with that. They're right there. They're next door neighbors.
Of course, funding for Ukraine remains an open question as to how it will be dealt with in the House, whether there is a legislative solution to be found in that body. Meantime, though, a committee in the House is moving forward on a separate issue, and this pertains to a relevant committee you are on in the Senate. The House Energy and Commerce Committee just today passed unanimously a bill that would require TikTok to be divested from its Chinese owner ByteDance or be banned in the United States. Would you support that measure in the Senate? Do you think it would pass both chambers?
Absolutely, I would support that. I do think the influence of China on TikTok, on our youth, and what we see, commercial after commercial for TikTok, in my view, trying to convince us that all the best things happen here when we know the Chinese are behind this. Yes, they must divest of TikTok, and I would fully support that. Whether it would pass the Senate or not, I think it would have a pretty good vote. I'm not sure we'd get all the way, but I would certainly hope so.
Senator, who's your guest tonight, if you have one, for the State of the Union?
Well, I have a special guest, and that's my husband's coming, actually, to the State of the Union tonight to view the State of the Union, and I'll get his perspectives when we finish.
How about that? Well, you'll have to let us know what he thought of it. What a refreshing, non-political answer. Senator Shelley Moore Capito,
yes.
Thanks for joining us tonight from Capitol Hill.
Thank you all.
Coming up, more on the budget battle in Congress as we continue to count down to the State of the Union. We'll have more on that speech as well. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons in Washington. In just over 3 hours from now, President Joe Biden set to deliver his State of the Union address before a joint session of Congress. You will, of course, see and hear the speech here on Bloomberg TV and radio. And joining us for more on what to watch, Bloomberg's Jordan Fabian and Laura Davison. Great to have both of you with us. Happy State of the Union night. It's a big deal, Jordan, at the White House, which you cover for Bloomberg. Jeff Zients, the chief of staff, raising the bar in a series of interviews, predicting an energized Joe Biden, a man who meets the moment. This is, of course, coming off criticism and concern about his age. What's the deal with this? Are they not making things more difficult? Does he need to come in and do push-ups in the rostrum? Or how are they going to manage to capture this?
Right, exactly. This is one of these weird speeches that it might matter less what Joe Biden says than how he looks and sounds. Just given the month that he had coming off that special counsel report that called him a well-meaning elderly man who forgets things, he needs to show the American people he can beat Donald Trump in November and that he has the energy and fitness to serve another 4 years. So I think a lot of people are going to be closely watching, can he do the push-ups proverbially? Can he get through an hour-long speech, tick off all these issues in a way with no major stumbles and really command all these issues authoritatively?
Have him run down the aisle, Kaylee? I'm not sure what would meet the grade.
Well, what we know is that this is to a large degree, this is going to be about presentation.
Yes.
Just as much, if not more, as it is about policy. But that isn't to say this is going to be entirely absent of policy. And in fact, we've already gotten some reporting out today here at Bloomberg about what exactly might be contained in this speech, including, Jordan, a directive for the military to essentially expedite humanitarian aid coming into Gaza by building a port on the Gaza coast. Where is Israel in this? Are we circumventing an ally?
It sure seems that way between this announcement and the announcement last week that we're now airdropping. And that's in partnership with the Jordanian government, not the Israeli government. And so it definitely belies a level of frustration within the White House that is growing with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and how he's prosecuted this war. And if you look at this issue also in tandem with the age issue, you might say, well, they're not related. They are related. This speech is about neutralizing Joe Biden's political weaknesses. One of his big blind spots right now is with young progressive voters, Arab and Muslim voters in key swing states that do not approve of his handling of this war. And so that's why you're hearing about this in the State of the Union, that he is trying to assuage those concerns and really reassemble that coalition that he needs to win in November.
The age issue could be exacerbated when we get to the official Republican response. They've tapped the youngest woman to ever be elected to the Senate, a 42-year-old named Katie Britt, Republican senator from Alabama, who we spoke with a couple of weeks back on the importance of bipartisanship. This is on the heels of Senator Dianne Feinstein's death. Here she is.
Ways that she not just built relationships, but true friendships across the aisle with people that she may not have agreed with when it came to politics. But she knew that the best way to get things done in this institution, and therefore to get things done for this nation, was to build those relationships, be able to have tough conversations, and then to be able to move things forward.
So talk about a contrast here, Laura. I don't know what the venue is going to be, but she's obviously going to have a lot of folks watching her this evening, and it's going to remind us of how young she is and how old he is, right? That part of the choice here.
Yes, and she's young. She's in her 40s. She has that very sweet, soft voice, and looks like the mom next door. As Republicans are really trying to court suburban women with Trump at the top of the ticket, knowing that that is going to be a weakness for them. Of course, an additional sort of wrinkle in this is Katie Britt. Of course, is from Alabama, the state that just made the ruling that complicated a bunch of IVF procedures, effectively shutting them down in the state. So that's going to kind of be also swirling around her. Will she address that? We'll see. Republicans have really run away from this issue. The Alabama legislature just yesterday passed a temporary measure to make sure that fertility treatments were available. But this is a really complicated thing for her to thread, particularly with the Republican base, where, kind of how do you define when life begins, and how do you do that in a way that, gets moderates but doesn't alienate some of the very pro-life faction?
Well, and reproductive rights together with essentially the future of democracy is what keeps coming up in our conversations, previewing this as the way that the president is likely to try to draw a contrast between his predecessor and likely opponent in November and him, Donald Trump, of course, I'm speaking of here. This is the State of the Union, but obviously, Laura, it also is a campaign speech. But when you have so much about the border, and in fact, Donald Trump's rebuttal that he put out to the State of the Union was pretty much all about immigration and border policy, how much does the future of democracy stack up against real migrants crossing in real time?
When we see what people care about, immigration and economy are basically neck and neck for the top spot of issues. Particularly Democrats care more about democracy. That's something that they say they care more about. Republicans, that's not really registering. That's in sort of the single digits in terms of top issues for voters. So this is really, kind of people esoterically, are interested in democracy. That's something they care about. When it comes to making decisions, particularly that small group of people that will really end up mattering this cycle, independents, moderates in these swing states, it really comes down to kitchen table issues, looking particularly at the economy, and also because of all of the issues surrounding migration and how, particularly among older groups, that matters a lot more. There
have been loud calls for executive action on the border. He made a trip to the border last week. Will we hear about anything new tonight?
I think what you're going to hear is him using the bully pulpit to batter Republicans for killing that bipartisan immigration deal that emerged in the Senate. The White House has not signaled they're ready to do executive action as of yet. They're studying it. But Biden said right after that happened, I'm going to take this case around the country. He thinks this is a way to reverse all of those poor feelings about immigration that voters have about him and reverse it and put it on the blame on Republicans for killing that bill that included really a lot of strict policies and say, they couldn't take a good deal when they saw one.
All right. Bloomberg's Jordan Fabian and Laura Davison, thank you for joining us at this hour, and looking forward to the many hours to come of your coverage this evening. Now, coming up, Fed Chair Jerome Powell faced the Senate Banking Committee today, as if it wasn't a busy enough day here in Washington, suggesting the central bank may be getting closer to the confidence it needs to start cutting interest rates. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
I think we're in the right place, which is we're waiting to become more confident that inflation is moving sustainably at 2%. When we do get that confidence, and we're not far from it, it'll be appropriate to begin to dial back the level of restriction so that we don't, drive the economy into recession rather than normalizing policy as the economy gets back to normal.
Fed Chair Jay Powell wrapping up a second day of testimony on Capitol Hill and suggesting that the central bank could be getting close to the point at which they might cut interest rates. Joining us now is Bloomberg's Enda Curran, who is covering this for us. So, Enda, when you're the Fed chair and you have to appear for this congressional testimony, you try not to make any news at all. You especially try to avoid signaling to financial markets what direction you're going to go. Do anything that's going to be market moving. By saying he's not far, did he accidentally make a little news?
Well, accidentally or deliberately, hard to say, but no doubt about it, not far is a very important signal from the Fed governor that he says they're not there yet, but once inflation does get there, they're going to move. And that does imply, at least in the months ahead. He's certainly not putting off the idea that there won't be any rate cuts until maybe the end of this year or later. So it was an important statement. And by the way, the context in which it came was he was getting withering criticism from both sides of that political divide in those hearings about not the rate of inflation, but living costs. He was getting it in the neck from senators from all sides about cost of living, about borrowing costs, about the price of goods. So he was feeling the pressure today that this is a real issue on the ground, and this was the nod he gave that inflation's heading in the right direction, and they acknowledged that.
His posture seemed relaxed today. He seemed to be a somewhat different Jay Powell, maybe because it was day two, maybe because it was the Senate. I wonder as well if it's maybe because they're getting closer to the target. They spent more time on fiscal policy than that sort of throwdown on regulations that we saw in the House yesterday.
Yeah, the real fireworks was yesterday when he came out and gave that big nod that they're hearing what's going on with the banks and they're going to work on the regulations. So that was that. Today, as you say, yes, much more cruise control. He sounded quite comfortable. As I mentioned, they were really throwing it at him from all angles that they're getting it in the neck from their constituents about inflation. Yeah, right. But he kept repeating, look, this is going where we wanted. Inflation is coming off. He seems comfortable with it. Not completely confident yet, of course. He wasn't declaring victory, but by all accounts, he's in control.
Of course, he was doing this testimony against a backdrop of some concern out there about commercial real estate in light of what we're seeing happening with New York Community Bank. And he was asked about this. Just take a listen to the chair's response.
This is a problem that we'll be working on for years more, I'm sure. There will be bank failures, but this is not the big banks. If you look at the very big banks, it's not a first-order issue for any of the very large banks. It's more, smaller and medium-sized banks that have these issues.
How would you describe his degree of concern, Enda?
He sounds, maybe sanguine is the wrong word, but he's saying nothing to see here for big banks, and not even big cities, by the way. He was making the point that this is maybe more a regional issue in America for smaller and medium-sized banks, downtown, the structural change, people not working from home, etc. That's where there's going to be pain. There will be some bank failures, there will be some loans going bad. But he was not suggesting this is a systemic issue at all. Now, of course, policymakers need to talk up confidence, but nonetheless, he was saying that they've got this as well. They're keeping an eye on it. There will be problems, but nothing broadly systemic for the wider economy.
And to Current, we thank you, as always, Kayleigh, on the State of the Union night. You wonder how Joe Biden's going to manage the issue of inflation. Can he tell the American people tonight that this problem will be solved by the time we end the year or by the time we get to the next election? I wonder if he goes there.
Well, and how much do you want to take a victory lap when polling shows voters are still really down on the economy and may not be feeling it to the extent the data shows?
We'll get into this, among other issues, coming up next with Jay Timmons, President and CEO of the National Association of Manufacturers. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
I want to be clear about something, because I know it's important to the American people. While this bill sends military equipment to Ukraine, it spends the money right here in the United States of America, places like Arizona, where the Patriot missiles are built, in Alabama, where the Javelin missiles are built, in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Texas, where artillery shells are made.
That was President Biden just last month. Of course, that legislation passed the Senate but did not ever make it to the floor of the House. And we'll be in the air tonight when the president addresses a joint session of Congress, the matter of Ukraine, the matter of funding our allies, and, of course, that money going to our manufacturing chain, the defense industrial base, is something we will hear about. And it's a matter of concern to Jay Timmons, the president and CEO of the National Association of Manufacturers, who joins Kayleigh and I now in Washington. It's great to see you. Welcome back to Bloomberg.
Thank you.
This is a matter that doesn't seem to be selling to certain conservative Republicans in the House. As we hear the refrain, we must secure our borders before we help someone else protect theirs. But this is about investments here in the U.S. How come that message doesn't resonate?
I don't really know, Joe, because I will tell you this. We're America, and we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We have the defense industrial base that needs our attention. Ukraine certainly needs our attention as they fight to preserve democracy in a very key part of the world. And at the same time, we can secure our borders. We were very supportive of the effort that Senator Lankford was pushing in the Senate and others. It really doesn't compute to say that we simply can't do both of those things at the same time, and a whole lot more, by the way.
Well, when we think about specifically weapons manufacturing and the defense industrial base here in the U.S., it also is just a question of whether the capacity exists to ramp this up, because this isn't a new issue necessarily that we've been running low on a few things. Are there issues that manufacturers could face if they're trying to produce this very quickly so that we can provide it not only to Ukraine, but other conflicts we may be facing abroad?
Well, look, I have total confidence in our defense manufacturers, and I know that they can handle whatever needs that we have, whether it is specifically for Ukraine or if it's for other hot spots in the world, or if it's for our own domestic supply. I don't have any issues with that. I do think, though, that there are some concerns with the supply chain, and some of those can be addressed. I hope the president addresses that tonight in his State of the Union address. Things like the tax trifecta that we've heard so much about, that has a lot to do with investing in research and development, as well as immediate expensing and interest deductibility. All of those things matter to all manufacturers, but certainly defense manufacturers as well.
We got into this recently with retired Army Brigadier General Mark Kimmett, who spoke to the availability or lack thereof of weapons in the U.S. Take a listen.
We are seeing our arsenal of democracy, our capability to build the weapons that we need to defend this country against all enemies, foreign and domestic, is drying up. We have been whistling past the graveyard of the military-industrial base for so long, and perhaps Ukraine, as tragic as that may be, is the canary in the coal mine.
The canary in the coal mine, that sounds pretty dire. This is not just about providing weapons to Ukraine. This is also about replenishing our own stocks.
Well, I think both of those things are necessary, and I'll say it again. We can walk and chew gum at the same time, right? But we have to have action in order to do that. It has to have the proper funding for the
Well, that's going to come to a head next week,
and then, of
course, next
course,
tranche of bills.
Exactly.
Are
and then, of course,
you trying to influence the outcome of that legislation?
Sure, of course. We feel very strongly. Well, first of all, you want stability in terms of the appropriations process. We don't have that right now. We're hopeful that we can move this ball forward, in a fulsome way to get us through the end of the fiscal year, and then hopefully we can really focus on the needs not only of our allies overseas, but as you point out, here at home.
Well, and when we think about what this president has tried to do here at home, and you mentioned some of the things you would like to hear out of the State of the Union this evening, if he were to come out there and say, my administration has brought on a manufacturing renaissance through the Inflation Reduction Act, bipartisan infrastructure bill, pick your policy, to what extent is that true?
Chips and science as well.
Chips, too.
Right.
Is it true?
So,
has he done that, or is there more work to do?
I think Joe Biden deserves a lot of credit right now for where we are in the manufacturing economy. He's also got to be looking to the future. So this is really, this answer is not an easy yes or no answer, Kayleigh, to be quite honest. If you look at those three pieces of legislation that you just mentioned, I think this president deserves a ton of credit. But then you have to think about, well, what is next? And what does the future look like? The future is being written right now by either action or inaction of the Congress and the administration. I brought up the tax trifecta. If we don't see that, that can lead to literally billions of dollars of bad numbers for manufacturers. That means less investment. That means less job creation, less wage growth. Those are three things that this president has said he wants. The regulatory agenda, the onslaught that is coming out of the agencies. Think of the PM 2.5 regulation that came out a few weeks ago, which, by the way, we just sued the agency on. That could cost jobs everywhere in this country and cause some very difficult choices. 40% of our country will be right now, because of that regulation, is in a non-attainment area. What does that mean? That means that mayors and governors are going to have to make choices between building those bridges that are available with the infrastructure dollars and allowing private sector investment to put a shovel in the ground and build a new factory or facility, perhaps a new chips facility. That doesn't make sense. It doesn't compute.
Jay, we're going to hear about the border tonight, one way or the other from this president, whether there is executive action or maybe an opportunity to blame Republicans for not getting this bill passed. Are you more concerned right now with border security or a working immigration system, a legal immigration system that can help us with labor shortages that surely your members are talking to you about?
Well, I would say that if you have a working immigration system, you have border security. I think that those two things go hand in hand. And we have a proposal that we've shared with Congress and with the administration and the previous administration. We call it a way forward, because we do believe that we can fix the system, that Congress can fix the system. Border security is an absolute necessity. There's no question about that. But to your point, we have to have a system that allows us to focus on the employment needs of this country. The latest figures that came out today, as a matter of fact, 662,000 open jobs in manufacturing. The immigration reforms that we've heard about aren't going to solve all those issues, but it's going to help. And it's going to help us fill those jobs. And by the way, there's something like 9 or 10 million open jobs throughout the entire economy. We need workers in this country. So immigration, legal immigration, people who want to come here and work, we ought to be welcoming them. It only helps build quality of life for everyone in America.
All right, Jay Timmons, great to see you here
in
our Washington studio.
Much.
Thank you so much for coming in. He, of course, is the president and CEO of the National Association of Manufacturers. Now, still ahead, a House committee passes through a bill 50-0 unanimously that could see TikTok banned in the U.S. if ByteDance doesn't divest it. We'll have more details with our political panel next. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
This bill is not a ban, and it's really not about TikTok. This bill is a choice, and it's a choice for ByteDance, as well as any other social media app controlled by a foreign adversary.
That was Democratic Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy from Illinois speaking today after the House Energy and Commerce Committee passed unanimously 50-0 a bill that could see TikTok banned if ByteDance, its Chinese owner, does not divest it. And I thought we couldn't agree on anything in Washington these days. Joining us now, our political panel, Rick Davis, partner at Stone Court Capital, and Jeannne Zaino, political science professor at Iona University. And guys, we have to talk about TikTok for a second, because there's been a lot of buzz around a ban for a very long time. Feels like it died down. And all of a sudden you get a unanimous vote to advance it out of committee. If you can get 50 votes for anything with no dissents, Jeannne, in this Congress, does that mean it's guaranteed this thing is happening? Is this the one thing we can all agree on?
Yeah, I mean, the idea that we would get here is stunning in this Congress, but it is the one thing that people in Washington seem to be able to agree on is going against China. So that's why it's popular. I would like to know, though, and, you know, I'm just going to step back and say how many of those 50 people are campaigning on TikTok right now?
You mean like the Biden campaign?
Like the Biden campaign, thank you. So I do think there's that portion. And I also am a little bit apprehensive about the idea that if a company is owned and operated somewhere else, even an adversary like China, if they don't divest in the United States, they can't operate here. I'm not sure how much that is in keeping with the notion of free markets. So I understand the security concerns. And also, by the way, could they also pass privacy laws concerning our own social media companies as well? So there's a lot about this I have questions about, and I will stop now.
Very skeptical of it. What about all the lobbyist money that fell on Washington like a snowstorm and shut everybody up for a year on this? I don't know how it came back to life, Rick. Block the talk, does it move?
Block the talk moved. I mean, you were just talking about it. 50 votes is hard to get in that chamber. And I think that it is a lobbyist-explained phenomena. You know, we had all these hearings. Everybody was upset about it, and then everybody who could walk got paid by TikTok and by ByteDance to lobby against it. And what happened? A shroud fell over this issue. Nobody was talking about it, but it didn't change the attitude that members in Congress have about China coming in here and stealing our data and manipulating our youth. And I just think, for my purposes, maybe the only thing that they should be allowed to do on TikTok is campaign commercials, because the Chinese deserve to have to see all that crap.
There you go.
And nothing else. So my view is ban the talk. Let's get it done now. If it walks like a duck, And it sounds like a duck. It's a duck. It's a ban. It's not a ban.
Well, that's true, right? This is a ban. Come on.
Well,
ByteDance isn't divesting
It's a
anything.
ban with a choice, perhaps, because they are giving the choice of divestiture
Fair enough.
to ByteDance versus just there is no alternative option.
No, that's what he meant, but it's a ban.
But what does it say that this is where we are all amazed that there was agreement on an issue in the middle of a spending battle, questions around supplemental funding to allies like Ukraine, and Congress is going to move forward on banning TikTok? Is this really our most urgent priority, Rick?
Well, I think it is an urgent priority. I think we saw a lot of people coming together on both sides of the aisle to go after Huawei. That was a successful endeavor to keep our allies from using a platform built by the Chinese to spy. And now they've found ways around it by creating their own capacity to build chips in China. But we still did the right thing. This is another example of that. And so I think people have to wake up. And it'll be interesting to see if Joe Biden says this tonight. China is not anything other than an adversary. And so their companies, their activities, we now hear it about EVs. The administration got tough with them. We have to start putting China and their business interests in the United States into a category of adversarial relationships.
Yeah. We're going to be seeing the president talking soon. Maybe he'll bring up TikTok. This will be a campaign issue. Like you said, we're seeing campaign ads on the whole thing. And I wonder if the Chinese will have to endure no labels ads as part of this punishment, because the group today says they're going to do this. I guess making good on a promise, Jeannine, at Super Tuesday, they said if it was Joe Biden and Donald Trump, they would run a candidate. Well, guess what? They don't have one. But apparently they're launching a campaign anyway. How does that work?
Yeah, I guess we'll know for certain tomorrow when they have this top secret, not so secret meeting with the delegates that we don't know who they are.
Right.
And we don't know who's funding these folks or the process. We're going to learn all of that apparently tomorrow, and then maybe a candidate going forward. But the reality is they have very little shot of getting a candidate that can win electoral votes. So really what they're going to do is they are going to rob probably Joe Biden, but maybe Donald Trump of some of those electoral votes. And my fear is this thing gets thrown into the House. And while they can have 50 votes for a ban on TikTok, imagine where our House of Representatives is if they have to choose the president. I mean, that is just stunning to me. I think this is spoiling to the extent that we know anything about it at this point today.
Just one final bit on TikTok, because the headline just crossed the Bloomberg terminal. Congressman Steve Scalise, the number 2 House leadership, says, I will bring TikTok bill to the House floor next week. So we all know what we'll be talking about then. First, though, we got to get Rick Davis to weigh in on no labels. Who's the candidate?
So let me just say, number one, No Labels has their heart in the right place. Like 70% of America, they're disappointed that Donald Trump and Joe Biden are going to be the nominees. So they come with all the purest intent. But the bottom line is we are a two-party system. We have operated successfully as a two-party system. That's what creates reforms within the parties. When they fail, they reform or they're out. And so adding a third element to this in an organized party fashion like what they're trying to do, I think balkanizes American politics. And underneath all that is a dangerous move for our elected system. That being said, they don't have a candidate yet. Maybe they have a candidate, and they're just having to go through the charade of talking to, I guess, people who are interested in this, because they're not delegates and they're not members. So I don't know who's going to be on the Zoom call when they actually say, hey, should we actually post up a candidate? And yet it's confusing to me whether they will then use the same process to nominate a candidate with the same sort of pseudo delegates, or are they just going to do the old-fashioned way that I used to love, back room, cigar chomping Pauls. They get together and say, you're it. You're our candidate. Yeah. And I can only hope that that's part of the narrative.
So much for a new politics. There, I have to mention that the concerns about this having a spoiler effect may have been answered in new polling, new research done today by Third Way, which has been working overtime to try to stop this. It finds a theoretical Nikki Haley Dean Phillips ticket, if that's your unity ticket, wouldn't come close to being able to win. Haley Phillips gets 9%, fourth place, damaging Biden, Kayleigh more than Trump.
But both Haley and Dean Phillips have suggested they wouldn't want to be on the ticket anyway, so you do have to consider that. But to your point, this is the concern of a lot on the Democratic side, that ultimately this is just going to serve as the ultimate spoiler and send Trump back to the White House.
Absolutely. And it could happen, I guess. We'll find out tomorrow. As Jeannie said, the big meeting and the vote. Coming up, We take a look at what to watch in the State of the Union tonight as President Biden faces concerns about his age, his handling of the economy, the border. We'll have that with our panel next on Balance of Power, Bloomberg TV and radio.
First is lay out a very clear vision of where he's going to take this country, and that is incredibly important. The second thing they've got to do is start to draw the contrast between them and Donald Trump and the Republicans.
He has to paint the picture of what 4 more years of Joe Biden will be and what the hell that 4 more years of Donald Trump could be.
I think he's going to probably lay out a contrast of if you want democracy and you want freedom for make a choice on reproduction or reproductive rights, like I'm your person, against someone who's not.
I want to hear the president talk about the issues that are front of mind for so many Americans. And certainly, that begins with our fundamental freedoms, the immigration challenges, the need for border security and immigration reforms.
American people are looking for his message on immigration, and they're looking to see if his age really does matter.
He's got to be vigorous. He's got to be strong. He's got to be clear in what he wants to achieve over the next year, over the next 5 years.
This is one of the only things he's going to have with the whole country watching to go straight at it and convince those people that he's up to that job.
Some suggestions about what Joe Biden should address tonight in his State of the Union speech. Back with us now, our political panel. Rick Davis, partner at Stone Court Capital, and Jeannne Zaino, political science professor at Iona University. They will be with Kayleigh and I for the duration here as we bring you special coverage of the State of the Union address this evening. It's a big day in Washington, a big night, of course. And I every year say the same thing, Jeannne. What would be the power of a mic drop moment? The president goes up there and does a 15-minute speech and leaves the building. It would be the most refreshing thing of all time. But now we're hearing he has to go longer than ever and to sort of appear to have stamina. Is that what we're in for?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all hope not. Chuck Schumer used to give a graduation address where he would come up, rip up his notes and say, congratulations, and leave. And that would, of course, get the students all excited.
Brilliant.
So maybe they'll take you up on that. I thought you were going to say he's going to do push-ups on the floor.
Waiting for that,
to prove his vigor.
Yes.
I think my view is what Joe Biden really needs to focus on topic-wise. We do know he needs to look energetic and vigorous and all those things, but I think topic-wise, it's got to be economic populism, number one, and freedom and at home and abroad, number two. The contrast word, some of the folks were saying in the piece you played, that's the way you draw the contrast between what he describes as the MAGA Republicans and the Democrats. Economic populism and freedom at home and abroad. That includes reproductive rights, defending us against NATO. All of those things fit under that umbrella, and it's Joe Biden's comfort zone.
But if this is about contrast, Rick, this is a campaign speech. This isn't a State of the Union.
Well, if he gives a State of the Union speech, he's making a critical error, right? And as Mr. Messina said, this is his one chance between now and the convention speech to have the entire country galvanized in watching him tell the American public why he ought to get a second term, and that is a campaign speech. If he goes through a recitation of issues to make Congress happy and pay off the, lobbying organizations all around town, he's going to shoot himself in the foot. Although I do like the idea about 4 hours into the speech, the chamber is quiet, and he says, and God bless America. And there's nobody there. That's a different mic drop moment.
Yes, I suppose.
And the only thing people will say is, wow, look at the stamina.
Yeah,
we forgot what he said.
For God's
oh,
sake.
my God. That would actually be spectacular. But the number one is, last year he said, the theme of the speech was let's finish the job. Mm-hmm. I mean, what's the report card on that? Is the job finished? No, of course not. It's going to be, we have more to do.
Yes.
And so he's got to lay out that future, because he's running against a former president who's all about the past, the grievances, the retribution.
Yeah.
It's all about, January 6th. And what Joe Biden's got to do in order to get back those young people who are looking for a future to talk about the future and how great the country is and how well positioned he is to be the president of another 4 years. And if he doesn't do that, then you squandered a perfect moment in time.
He's apparently not going to mention Donald Trump tonight, staying true to form, States of the Union past. Is that smart in the politics of today?
I do think it's smart. I think we will hear about Donald Trump, but he won't be named. But although we understand Donald Trump's going to be live, what do you call it, truthing, I guess?
Rebutting in some form.
He's a fact checker now, Kaylee, so that's that's what we'll be hearing.
All right, and we'll be hearing a lot more from Jeannne, Sheehan, Zaino, and Rick Davis. They'll be joining us later this evening. And, of course, in the meantime, you can check out the Washington Edition newsletter on the Terminal and online. I'm
going to make my way to Capitol Hill, Kaylee. I'll meet you from up there. Rick and Jeannne with us for a great program later. We'll be back with the State of the Union address, 8:30 Eastern. This is Bloomberg.